I'm going to talk about that galvanizing concept of day zero. How close is it? And maybe what we can start to do about it. We're not the only city to have undergone a day zero experience. And we tend to forget that. And at the moment, we've been labeled as the first city, supposedly in the world, in the way in which the journalists are telling the story, in which we're about to run out of water. And I hope that the journalists who are packing their bags, who are coming here somewhere around about April, are coming to see how we're going to manage it and not manage our fate. One other point before I move on to that is that we also blame the city for not having invested in dealing with this crisis right now. The city's done nothing is often the comments that I hear. But we forget that the city was instrumental in really applying pressure on the Department of Water and Sanitation, who at that stage had no money to build a new dam. And the city was instrumental in building the Berg River Dam. 2004, it was finally commissioned, and that dam today is what is going to probably save us from going through day zero. What the city is trying to do is to make sure we don't get to that red zone, the failure zone. The failure zone is where day zero is. And so far, we're looking fairly good. And there are a number of things that are going to happen, I believe, to take us out of that critical zone, above the critical zone, and not see this failure. So let's look at some of those things. And first of all, I'm watching what the agricultural sector is doing. Because for them, day zero has already arrived. Their taps were turned off 10 days ago. And so for me, that's the first national tragedy, national disaster. And also to say the farmers have given a gift to the city. The percentage on the top is important. We've got to a stage of new water coming into the system that has been procured. It's been actions on the ground right now. There are desalination plants that have been put in place, very small, which will deliver ultimately no more than about 10 million litres. But it's a learning game. And I believe we've done the right thing and not invested overly with desalination plants, because it would rain anyway, obviously, couldn't it? But we've learned how it works in the polluted bays of False Bay and Table Bay. One of the biggest challenges about desalination is that the reverse osmosis membranes that are separating salt from the fresh water often get clogged. And so if you've got polluted bays, you've got a new challenge. That's been everyone's experience of RO for many years. And the desalination technology is changing all the time. It was only on our plan for 2030. And it was right to be on the plan for 2030 because what we've seen in desal now, you can imagine what it's going to look like in 10 years' time. Very different, much more efficient, able to handle all the things that are our concern, energy and also pollution. And brine that gets into lots of salt, that concentration that gets into the oceans. So it's an important investment which is small at this stage. What is bigger is the aquifers, and the Cape Flats aquifer is now starting to yield. Potentially, it could be anything between 100 million litres a day and 150 million litres per day. And there's lots of discussion around that, and everyone's getting obviously very concerned. That's our low-hanging fruit. That is also the potential for us somewhere in May to get a stronger water source available. Some of it will come online earlier, I understand, but some of it is still really in the very early excavation processes. Remember that it does rain, and we forget this quite often because we've been disappointed so many times. About 10 days ago, maybe a little more, a story broke in Time magazine in particular, which brought an international focus on Cape Town. Cape Town is being watched by the rest of the world. And we felt it because we've talked all over the world in big television stations ever since. It's the first city supposedly running out of water. You could, for argument's sake, say we've always run out of water. There are private water schemes, there are all sorts of things going on there. And we can look at our own city. And it's so fascinating for me to see the social justice issues coming out here of saying, well, we can teach you how to live on 25 litres of water today. We can teach you how to get that water. We don't need to set up pods, places where our water is going to be offered. It's actually all in our settlements already. We know how to do it. We can teach you something. And I think it's so interesting to see this, the stage being flipped. That doesn't make it right, by the way, and I need to also say that. It doesn't make it right for suffering in what might come if day zero arrives. So what can we do? 3 things, and I want to illustrate this before I close. First of all, we need to keep calm. I think that the panic level rose and there was incredible reaction, and the city, I think, has realized how people did respond. And maybe a lot of high water users have suddenly woken up, and if they have, good for them. So we need to do that at all costs, and let me be careful about the word all costs. We've got to be very careful that this is properly managed and that we don't end up doing short-term investments, short-term damage on this all costs idea to avoid day zero. It may be that panic causes us to do things that are inappropriate. And then we need to save water as much as we can. We have to avoid day zero. I think day zero for me is unworkable. It is just too catastrophic to even think that we could go down that way. And I believe that a city with the sophistication and its investments, sophistication in its infrastructure, should not be going down this route at all. We've invested too much time and effort and expertise, and the good Lord is going to have to look us after the rest of it here. And then last of all, we need to work within communities. And let me just say 1 or 2 more slides to try and illustrate those 3 points. First of all, this one over here, I've used the red background. It is the sort of fear, I suppose, but on the white side, on the text says, keep calm and let's save water while we have it. Because to be without water is horrible, is absolutely horrible. So remember that, and if you're trying to look for some nice, pleasant slogans that you can use in your conversations, it's keeping calm and saving water while we have it. At UCT, we have banners that are about to fly around our campuses which says, stop day zero. And we can do that, and let's save water while we can and while we have it. We're doing, and this might be helpful for those particularly engaged in church leadership here, as to how should you approach this and how should you build community around what you're doing. You need to start at the very top layer, at the top of that upside down triangle, and you call on a commitment first of all, and you find champions to help drive the system down. And you'd be amazed that is, in fact, the most effective, most cost-effective way of bringing water down. Why so? Well, in January, just to give you a picture, in January 2016, so not far back now, the city of Cape Town collectively was using 235 litres per person per day. It's almost a dream, isn't it? But we were doing that. And so our conversations were not around water because it was all comfortable. And we had lots of it. At this stage in the year, in 2014, our dams were almost full. So we start at the top. We find the champions and we start making commitments. The next one is we start doing some simple water audits. And you need the champions to help you here. You need to count the water. Know your numbers is a slogan we use at UCT. And so we then said, well, start thinking about it. How much water do you use to go to the toilet? How much water do you drink? How much water do you use for washing? And so on. So in their minds, they're able to look at those activities and practice accordingly. The next one is to go down to the ones we know well, to reuse water, to reduce rather, and then to reuse water, and then to look to alternative sources. So, from our Water Justice Conference last year, how does water reconnect us? How does it enable our faith communities to work together? And what is the opportunity that this horrific drought that we're experiencing bring us together and to talk water? How does water reconnect our city? How do the canals and the services that we see across the different parts of our city bring us together in terms of a new thinking around our water and water connection? Water is sacred. We are stewards. And how does that start to change our understanding, not just of water quantity, not just of the flow that we feel we desperately need right now, but also water quality